Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host and your moderator. And today is the first episode after 2 years of the Chocolate Life Live. Today, I'm starting off on a new series called Pod Save Chocolate. And there's going to be a difference in theme, there's going to be a difference in tone, and we'll get to that over the course of the next hour. But what I want to do is I want to thank all of the members of the Chocolate Life for their support and their sponsorship of every episode of Pod Save Chocolate. And I want to remind everybody that they can go into the comments and they can let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I don't need to know if it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, but if you're connecting from somewhere outside of the United States, I'm especially interested to know. I'll get that shout out up on the screen. And of course, at any point during the hour, if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to present to me or to my guest, then let me know. And with that, let's introduce my guest today, which is Birgitte Rasine. Hey, Birgitte, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Clay. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, I am too. I am, number one, we're getting towards Thanksgiving, so I'm thankful and grateful for the friendship that we've developed over the course of the last decade or so. And I'm really, really happy that you agreed to be part of this first episode of Pod Save Chocolate. Now, for people who don't know you, can you give us a little bit about your background? Well, no, let's start about this way. People respond to my origin story like, I know exactly where I was when I said, okay, I want to become a chocolate critic. So what was the moment, right, in your life that said, yeah, I want to do this chocolate thing? Do you remember where you were and what you were doing when that happened?
Probably when I was born.
Okay, I came out of the womb,
Yeah.
right?
Well, no, I
Destined for chocolate.
have a confession to make. So when I
Okay.
was a child in the Czech Republic, I actually didn't like chocolate very much. And I think that's because we just didn't have the good stuff. We were behind the Iron Curtain. This is a country where Kellogg's Honey Smacks was only obtainable on the black market. So you can imagine that the level of chocolate quality wasn't great, right? So I basically grew up, I had a chocolate-less childhood. So I've suffered. But but so
Okay. Yeah, I feel your pain. I feel your
yeah,
pain.
yeah. But of course, then I came to the United States, became a hard and fast foodie, and uh, and started to discover craft chocolate. Now that only happened because I wrote this book, The Jaguar and the Cacao Tree, and I had to do research. I mean, I'm a serious writer, journalist. I have to do my research. You have to taste the thing that you're talking about. And so that experience was really when my conception of the chocolate world exploded. I had no idea that this exists.
But the Jaguar and the Cacao Tree is not your first book. Is that correct? You have another book which is called The Serpent and the Jaguar.
Yeah,
And so what's the relationship between those two
yeah.
books? I
So
mean,
so the
as a storyteller, there's some research and there's some motivation behind this. So tell me a little bit about The Serpent and the
yeah,
Jaguar and how that led into the Jaguar and the Cacao Tree, because I'm guessing a connection because of the Jaguar.
yeah. Well, I like jaguars a lot. I like big wild animals. Um, so it really started. I mean, gosh, how far back do we want to go? So in 1998, I was working in sustainability. I was working on this book called Tropical Rainforest, which was all about how the Amazon is getting deforested and burned down. And to condense a very long story, for about a decade, I would attend conferences at the United Nations and other NGOs. And if you can imagine, a very expansive conference hall with executives from large companies, various representatives from trade and the environment, and we would discuss human rights and climate change and water issues and deforestation and the whole bit. But it was a lot of talking, as you can imagine. And so
Mhm.
I I remember thinking, well, but what about the people in the Amazon right now? I imagined a farmer cutting down, or anyone really cutting down the trees on their land because they felt like they had to do farm cattle ranching to make money, or gold mining, or whatever. And so I'm always thinking about the people in the field, as opposed to the people in their business suits in the conference. And there's a huge disconnect there. And over time, I became uh, a little bit disenchanted with just the lack of action. And I don't want to blame anybody, but that's just the way that it was. And so I pulled out of those conferences and I said, what can I do as a journalist and a writer? Because I've been a writer since I was 6 years old. Now, if you want to talk about moments, that was a moment when I was 6 years old, and there was a specific night when I realized I was a writer. So, so I've always been a writer and a storyteller, and I said, well, I should write a book, because if we're talking about moving the needle, and if we're talking about people changing their behavior and doing something good for the planet, you're not going to do it by pointing fingers and blaming even companies or people, individual people. You have to engage them. You have to inspire them. And there's a quote by David Attenborough, that, my condensed version of it, because I can never remember the full thing, but it's basically, you can't protect what you don't know, and you can't love what you don't know. So
And if I can jump in there, as a writer, you can't write about what you don't know. And
exactly.
so there
Yeah.
is that connection there,
There,
and perhaps an
yes.
inspiration from the Attenborough quote. But I think that I want to jump in here and put a needle on this when I think about what I want to do with Pod Save Chocolate, which is different from what the Chocolate Life Live is about. Is you used two really important words for me, which are engage and inspire. When I was at the International Cocoa and Chocolate Forum last month in London, one of the things that we talked about is that diplomacy is not a once a year activity. It's
Yeah.
something you need to engage with, and what are you going to commit to? And so we're going to get to that a little bit later as a part of what it is that's going on. But I am fascinated by the Mayan calendar and, sort of the whole mythology. So if we look, for example, at, the Maya and the pre-Maya, what they did is they elevated cacao into their creation mythology. Right.
Right.
And do you know anything about, how that happened? Because if we look back to Ecuador, which is where there's the first archaeological record of the domestication and use of cacao, it doesn't look like they did the same thing. It was treated very, very differently. So, in your research, do you know anything about the connection that gets made there?
Well, so I don't know that anyone knows how it actually started. I know that I think it was you who was in maybe a previous episode. You were talking about the fact that the people in Ecuador had ayahuasca as opposed to cacao, and so they didn't really need to make cacao sacred, right?
Well, I mean that is a theory that I have proposed,
Right.
and
Yeah. I mean, it's
but
plausible. It's definitely plausible, right? We know that basically, if you think of the concept of the world tree, which the Maya are certainly not exclusive to that. The world tree is a concept that's used by many different cultures. So in the cacao producing regions of Mesoamerica, it was not the ceiba tree, but the cacao tree that was considered the world tree. And so back then, whether or not you lived, whether or not you as an individual lived or your society lived, depended a lot on the will of the gods. Meaning, are you going to have a drought, or are you going to have plentiful rains? Are you going to be able to sustain your population? And so no wonder that the native people, for tens of thousands of years, have revered the natural world. I mean, that is what you're a part of. You are connected to that on a very intimate level. And so to them, the cacao tree was a sacred tree. And so, their creation myths really spoke to that cacao and corn specifically were brought to mankind by the gods. And therefore it
okay.
was their way back to the gods.
So can I ask a question? I mean, obviously there's a world tree mythology coming out of Norse traditions, right? And I think they also call it the world tree, right?
Hmm. I believe
Um,
they do, yeah.
but was there the equivalent of a zodiac mythology, all right, in Mayan culture? And I,
So
I I will explain why I'm asking the question once you
yeah,
answer it.
yeah. I mean, not well. The Mesoamerican calendar is really a system of calendars, and it wasn't created by the Maya. It was created by the Olmecs and probably people before them. So it's an ongoing tradition. The Maya really took it and evolved it on a much higher level, and that's what people know today. So you have in particular, there are three systems, right, that we know. That's the long count. That was the one that was responsible for the world ending on December 21st, 2012, which didn't happen, and it never was meant to happen. Then you have the hub, which is an agricultural calendar, and that is based on the solar year. And they use that for things like accounting, planting, harvest, things like that, very practical, pragmatic survival things. And then you have the Tzolk'in, which is a spiritual, personal astrological calendar. And that is a 260-day calendar. It has 13 numbers and 20 day signs. So that is their zodiac. And I wrote a book about that because, again, as a journalist, I was seeing this trend that started in the 1980s with Jose Arguelles, and basically, white Western authors coming in and appropriating that cultural concept of the Mayan calendar and making it their own and marketing their names off the back of the Maya. And I didn't particularly like that. I didn't think that was right. So I wrote a book where I consulted with a lot of Maya scholars. I called up one of the elders in the mountains of Guatemala. I was, talking to him over a crackling phone line in Spanish, researching, asking him about what is this calendar about? How do you approach it? What does it mean for you? And that's where the book came from. And that is why I actually chose chocolate for my next book, because of the creation myths that I had researched as a result of that first book. That's the thread that starts right there.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm asking about that is that I listened to a researcher talk about the notion that if you look up at the sky at the constellations, I mean, 5,000 years ago, I have to be an extremely astute observer of the natural world around me if I want to survive. I mean, we tend to forget that, pre-modern agricultural sciences, that, these people were very, very sophisticated in terms of their breeding. Potatoes, chili peppers, I mean, maize. I mean, these are all cultivated products. I mean, even Criollo cacaos are cultivated bread products. Most likely, forasteros came from South America up into Mesoamerica, where they were transformed. They were deliberately bred. But the reason why I'm asking, the reason why I mention this is that there's a theory that says that at some point you would look at the sky and you would say, when the stars were in this position, I could predict that the River Nile would flood in 30 days. Reliably. And it was really important for me to know about the Nile flooding. And over the course of perhaps hundreds or thousands of years, what happened is that these signs in the sky went from being predictors to actually having agency. They didn't just predict the change, they were responsible for the change, right? And by being able to take very, very, close understanding, what it meant is that I would be more productive in my agriculture, and that would make me a stronger people, right, compared with the people around me that weren't as observant and didn't have this knowledge. And I'm guessing that we don't know this about that, the connection of the zodiac and the agricultural calendars, because the personal zodiac and the agricultural calendars are two different things, right? And do you know if did they have agency in them? Or can we possibly know that?
Yeah, it's so. I mean, the Maya were a polytheistic culture, right? They had gods for everything. They had a god for chocolate. They had a god for rain. They had goddesses for the moon and fertility and all of that. So, and for them, the divine was everywhere. It was in all forms of nature. And so the 20 day signs, they each have an animal, like a totem animal. You have dogs, you have eagles, you have the serpents, of course, the jaguar, right? And that's why I call the book The Serpent and the Jaguar. Those are the two of the most powerful day signs. And then the numbers themselves have agency as well. The 13 refers to the 13 joints in the human body, your neck, your elbows, all that stuff. So there's a lot of symbolism embedded basically everywhere. It's kind of like a fractal, if you think about it, right? From the top level all the way down to the micro, there are certain patterns that repeat. So do they have agency? Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think a very human tendency to anthropomorphize, right? We anthropomorphize the generative AI chatbots. So of course the ancients would have done that to
well, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Speaking of which, did you see the movie Her?
Yeah.
With Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, and was it Joaquin Phoenix?
Yes, I think
when he falls in love with his AI chatbot. Yeah, no, it is a very, very human thing. I mean, in partly, from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense if we see the leaves rustling to say, well, there's a Jaguar behind there, I better be careful, as opposed to it's the wind blowing. Because if I assume it's a Jaguar, I'm going to live another day. But if I assume it's the wind and it's a Jaguar, it's a problem.
Yeah.
For me that's going on. Yeah. So let's get this. I mean, one of the places, so we met face to face for the first time in Seattle.
Yes.
During a Northwest Chocolate Festival, like 2016, I think.
2016. It was November 10th, pretty close to my birthday. I remember.
Well, I know that we have email getting from that. I don't remember exactly the date, but yeah, so in a Thai restaurant, I remember that. So it was definitely a memorable evening for me. But it turns out that in addition to our connection through chocolate, we also have a connection in terms of technology. And so how do you find, or is there an overlap between your background as a technologist, and I'm going to guess as much a writer about technology as anything else, right? And its connection to chocolate. How do you see those two things working together?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a stretch, right? But right now, I think with a lot of climate tech companies using AI to help solve some of the environmental problems out there, there's certainly a connection there. Climate change is both a threat to cacao and it's also caused by cacao. There's kind of a catch-22, right? I mean, you talk about the deforestation that's going on in Ivory Coast and Ghana and other places because of the increased demand, which then drives people to deforest so they can plant cacao trees. At the same time, the disease vectors, the warming of the planet is changing the environment that cacao grows in. And so where AI can really come in is, well, a couple of things. There's a bar here actually called, I'm going to hold it up here, the Jungle Gold Bar. Blockchain bar, right? And so what these people are trying to do is use blockchain to trace the journey of this cacao bar, of this chocolate bar, from the origin all the way to the hand of the consumer, which I find very interesting. So that's definitely, something to potentially explore. But there's also a lot of AI systems, and I'm not talking like generative AI. I mean, there are different types of AI. The ones that can help crunch the data in terms of, modeling the systems, trying to figure out how the ecosystem is going to change. Because at this point, it's kind of like trying to stop a runaway train. These are massive global climatic system changes that we can no longer really change. All we can do is understand them better, adapt. I think adaptivity right now is the key word.
Displace and adaptability, as one of my favorite literary characters would say. I want to take a quick step and do a break here to remind everybody they're watching Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the host of these episodes. I'm also the creator of the ChocolateLife.com. And today my guest is Birgitte Rasine, who is an author, and is an avid chocolate fan and chocolate judge. I want to remind everybody who's watching that you can go into the comments on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook, live chat replay on YouTube, and ask us a question or just make a comment. Let us know where in the world you are connecting from today. We'll get that shout out up on screen. And share it with everyone. And then if you do have a question for either Birgitte or myself, we will definitely get that question asked and see if we can answer it for you today. So, I'm a big data guy, Birgitte, in the sense that a lot of my career has been about information management and information technology, and not only how to store data, but how to retrieve it in very, very interesting ways. And so I'm really intrigued about this notion of, if we could assemble a lot of what we think of as disparate data in lots of different ways, of what we might learn, not just from standard big data mining techniques, but are there special things that quote unquote AI does, right? In terms of, training neural networks or things like that, that might lead us to just really counterintuitive and perhaps surprising results?
That's a very good question. I mean, I write about it. I'm not a programmer and I'm not an engineer, so better leave that question to the experts. But But there is a lot of activity right now to looking at carbon credits, for example.
Mhm.
Um, what would it make sense to implement a system where a farmer that uses regenerative agriculture in their cacao plantations, for them to be able to be paid for the carbon credits, right? That's a
Mhm.
potential new source of income. So I think if
Mhm.
you marry the economic and the financial side with the environmental protection story, with
Mhm.
the global markets, right, as
Mhm.
well as
Well,
education, as well as it has another side to it, which is historically or lately, the appeal of becoming a cacao farmer to the young generations has not been very great. But if they start to see, oh, look, I can do blockchain, I can employ these fancy new technologies. This is cool. I can do social media. So if they can start, and I can make money, hey, this is a
mhm.
career that I want to do. Then you start to change it from, you start to increase that, or actually decrease that average age of a cacao farmer,
Mhm.
um, which is rather high, and start to lower it and start to get more, young people into the market. And I think that's,
Mhm.
for me, that's super exciting.
Right, and it doesn't, and certainly AI is not a necessary component of that, right? And I'm gonna guess that you're not a fan of AI generated stories. That
Nope,
you know,
nope, not at all.
no, I mean, number one is, in my experience, they tend to lack a real understanding of detail. Of
Well, they lack understanding, period. I mean, a large language model is not a brain. It doesn't think. It composes. It's a pattern recognition or prediction mechanism. So it's it's fascinating, because it really produces some interesting text. But I think that's almost beside the point. The point is that we are humans and we want to relate to each other. We have stories, we have life experiences, we make a connection. That's really what writing is about. It's not about the words themselves. It's the meaning that they bring.
And certainly, it's certainly something that I agree with you completely and totally. I've gone through a number of these generative text AIs, and I look at what they write, and I'm going, there's soulless, sem alma, I believe the Brazilian, we would say
Okay.
in Portuguese, um, so without soul. But certainly, one of the challenges I think that I've faced, and perhaps it's something that you face, is that as storytellers, one of our biggest challenges is getting people to care. Why should I care about chocolate in this way? Why should I care about cocoa in this way? It's the biggest thing, and I don't think that at the current state of the development that AI is really able to make that kind of connection because of this lack of awareness of what it is that's going on in the real world. Do you think there might, well, so it wouldn't solve that problem, but are you aware of any large language model bits of research that have said, let's go find everything we can know about cocoa and chocolate, right? And throw them into the large language model and really give it an understanding of what's
Yeah,
going on. I mean,
I haven't seen that. Yeah.
so that's actually a research area that I'm going to be proposing through international cocoa diplomacy, is that we look at how do we go about and use these kinds of technologies. And obviously, we'd want to own it, not Google or
Right.
Microsoft or any one of these other companies. But can we actually comb through 200 years of all of the literature, all of the research, and
Mhm.
actually be able to pull something out of it that a human researcher might not see, right? In, we want to find the
Mhm.
seed in a stack of pods, and we
Yeah.
can't go about quite doing that
Yeah. I
yet.
mean,
I mean, that's interesting and exciting to me.
yeah, I think you're talking about, a significant time savings, absolutely. And that's
Right.
exactly the kind of feature and function that I think AI
Mhm.
would be great for, is
Right.
understand what its power is and use it.
Right.
Use it to advance your own knowledge. And that's that.
Understanding, I think is,
Well, the
I mean,
human understanding, yeah.
yeah. So, it's one of those things when I think about the work that I want to do with international cocoa diplomacy, one of the core tenets is you can't make good policy decisions if you don't have good data.
That's right.
And so how can we use, and again, you're right, this might be a way in where we can engage with a younger generation, right, to be able to participate in the process of gaining this understanding. We need to figure out how to compensate them for that, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but the market is going crazy this morning, right? So for the first time in years, London is like $300 a ton over New York. Just everything is out of whack. Everything is out of balance. It's
Yeah.
just right. It's a Koyaanisqatsi moment, life out of balance. Um,
Mm.
Anyway, so what I want to do is we have a comment from Mayana, who's a visitor here today. She's been here before, Maria, from the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. So congrats on the new stage of the Chocolate Life. Thank you very much, Maria. I'm really, really excited. And I have to say, it's been a lot of fun. I commissioned a new bit of artwork. You can see it in the background of this image. That's not just the background, but the same artist. Her name is Sarah Scadeller. I met her when I was in London a couple of weeks ago. She also did the pod graphic that you see up in the corner. And I commissioned a new intro theme. So people can go back and I want you to know that I collaborated with Brigitte and Cairo, if I can mention the name, which is one of your children, on the production of that. And just this whole collaborative process has been really, really fun for me because until now, it's like, apart from the interview part, it's all just been me doing all of these things. So this rebranding has been a lot of fun for me. So I'm a judge at international chocolate competitions. You're a judge at chocolate competitions. I don't know if they're international or not, but neither of them is formally trained, right? So I never went to a school to learn this stuff. What was your journey to becoming a chocolate judge? And when did you decide, yeah, I'm good enough so that I'm going to go raise my hand and ask to be a part of that?
Well, I didn't raise my hand, actually. They invited me, the International Chocolate Salon. They reached out and they said, hey, would you like to be a chocolate judge? And I think it's because of the book, the talks that I had been doing. And at first I thought, well, I'm not certified, am I really qualified, whatever. And then seeing that it was, they didn't require a certification, just someone who's serious and professional, working in the world of chocolate. So I decided, well, let me start to look into this. And I was able to listen to some sessions with Maricel Presilla, Ed Seguin, people who have been tasting chocolate for a long time. And, the way that they explain about bitterness, astringency, acidity, taste, mouthfeel, the auditory portion of it, which is the snap that you feel, how it tastes, how it feels, what it looks like, right? All of those aspects of the experience, because it really is about the experience of chocolate, not just the taste. And so I got into it, really liked it. And in fact, there was a couple of times when I saw the results and some of the votes came in and it would be like, what? You voted for this? No, I totally disagree. Why? And so then you start to see, okay, all right, maybe we're getting a little too serious now. But I do take it very seriously. I follow all their rules.
Right.
It's a pro bono job, right? It's not paid, but I think it pays for itself in spades.
Well, yes, certainly there is an enormous amount of personal satisfaction in it. And I think that you've put your finger on, I think on what's a really important point. It's important to take the chocolate seriously, but not necessarily yourself too seriously. In the end, it's just chocolate, right? And so we need to remember that. And we do need to bring a sense of humor and fun. And one of the things that I love about doing in-person chocolate tastings, where there are groups of people who are strangers and they're sitting across the table for each other. And I like to do comparative tastings. So rather than, putting in their mouth and they're describing it, they have two things and they're describing how they're different, right? And I like to do this around pairings a lot. So one of the things that I love and for most interesting for me is you have two people tasting exactly the same thing who have diametrically opposed views of what they're tasting. And that's when things get interesting. Having the discussion around why do you hate it and then why do you like it is just the coolest thing. And that's, I think, where learning and understanding really, really does begin in these things. If the tasting is, oh, I'm the expert here, I tasted these two things, they go good together, yum, you should love them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's not nearly so interesting for me. So with that, what's your favorite category in a chocolate competition to judge?
Oh my God. I would say probably the ingredient portion, right? Meaning, well, they have this category called best ingredients, and what it really talks about is how do those in inclusion bars, how or blends, right? How do they fuse? Because you can have a chocolate bar where they put in physical pistachios and cherries and maybe some orange peel or whatever, and they're embedded in the bar. But I like the ones that are the blended ones. In other words, like, Ratza does a lemongrass or a hopped citrus, and that's infused into so it's just chocolate. You
So
don't
they're refined into the chocolate
they're
rather
blended in.
than,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's what I like, because like I've tasted the one of the most memorable ones I've ever judged was a biryani truffle. So it tastes like the dish biryani,
Hmm.
but it's a chocolate truffle. It blew my mind, that
Right.
someone is capable of producing this kind of experience. So
I have to agree with you there. I mean, my favorite categories are things like the flavored white chocolate bar or the truffles category. And because, for example, in white chocolate, it's a delivery vehicle for other flavors, and it
yes,
allows an enormous amount of creativity, right? And so, in the recent Craft Chocolate Challenge competition, there was a bar which is called Dreaming of Thailand, with wasabi and matcha and, coconut and all these other flavors. And you're going, oh my gosh, it never would have occurred to me to think about it this way. And, it's in white chocolate.
yeah,
And
exactly.
right. And then, so I really love that. And, my least favorite categories, right? Or it's when I've got a flight of like 7 or 9 different chocolates, and they're all 70% two ingredient from the same producing country. It's like
Mm.
I just want to rip my hair out and go, oh my gosh, how am I going to go try to parse the nuances of the differences between these things? And I just
That's
want to
when you're gonna
just
need an AI chip implanted in your brain.
yeah, yeah, no, no, I don't want. I mean, the man who will not be named,
Yeah,
whose initials are EM. I just think that's a bad idea.
yeah,
Um, bio implants into my brain. No, not happening
no.
anytime soon.
And
Um,
our brains they're not wired that way, right? I mean, it's
right.
the same reason why if you spend a month at home versus, a weekend away, that weekend away will feel to you like at least a week because your brain is firing with all the novelty that it's experiencing and seeing, as opposed to,
Mhm.
oh, this is just my house. So you no longer
Right.
start to pay attention.
Right. So going back to that and your mind expanding. So biryani truffle, right?
Hmm.
Are there any other, is there a bar of chocolate that stands out as you as being like particularly memorable in any way? I mean, I have mine, right? I can go talk about that. And I will actually talk about an old one and a new one for very
Yeah.
different reasons.
I I have so many. I mean, it's just, this is the thing about being a judge. You get to taste so many different things. But I did bring for you things that I got in Seattle at the Northwest Chocolate Festival last month. So this one was, I would say, the one that blew my mind the most. This is a company in Jamaica, One Cacao, and it's a white chocolate
Nick
with,
Davis.
yes. Do you know him?
He was a guest on the Chocolate Life Live, so
Oh,
absolutely.
wonderful. Yeah. So he and his partner put this sorrel white chocolate together, and I wish I could open it. I can't right now because I haven't done the photography yet, but it's not a white looking chocolate. It's a darker kind of like almost it has burgundy colors to it. And when you put it into your mouth, it literally transports you. And that's what I look for in a bar is, does this transport me? Does it surprise me? Does it make me recall memories of anything? And that's actually Maricel talks about that, her memories of growing up in Cuba and the flavors that you experience there. which is also a big part of tasting, is do you have an ample enough vocabulary to refer to all the different tastes and flavors that are coming up? So for me, this bar really, I've never tasted sorrel with anything, and
Right.
it's
So
very
I believe that it actually might be another word for hibiscus. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think so. I
As
think it,
opposed to sorrel, the green leaf. They're
yeah,
they're they're
yeah.
they're not the same thing, and it's often
I
confusing.
don't know what part of the plant they use, but it does feel very, the chocolate tasted very tangy,
Mhm.
citrusy. So it
Mhm.
might be, but the fact that they use the word sorrel makes me think maybe there's a little bit of the leaf as well. Who knows?
It's
I'll
quite possible.
have to ask Nick.
I will go ask Nick,
Yeah,
right, and find out what it is.
yeah,
But you make a really, really interesting point. I mean, which I have talked about on occasion, which is, there are three aspects of being rating and reviewing or judging chocolate, whether you're doing it for yourself or professionally, or anywhere in between. Which is number one, if you've never tasted anything, you can't identify it.
right.
And so, it helps if you want to do this to be Catholic in the sense of universal in your tasting, right? You want to taste everything. I've eaten things that I would like, it's like, no, I know what that organ does in my body. I don't want to eat it, right? But, I wanted the flavor and texture experience just so that I would have it, right? So you need to have the experience. If you've never tasted passion fruit, you'll never identify it, right? So that's number one. Right?
Yeah,
And number two is what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to store that taste memory. Right? You need to be able to, internalize it and understand what it is.
that's right. Yeah.
And then you need to be able to, when you're tasting something, you need to be able to reach back in there and
Hmm.
retrieve it and then being able to articulate it. So this vocabulary has got lots of different aspects to it. And when you think about what a lot of training is, it's just repetitive. It's, I've tasted this 100 times
Yeah.
before. And the whole idea is, that is the trick to being a great taster, if there is a trick, right? Which is, being able to taste something, put it into your memory, retrieve it, and then tell people, oh, it's matsutake mushrooms, or it's, what's the difference between a Persian lime and yuzu, right, and a Meyer lemon. I mean,
Yeah.
they're pretty nuanced when it's in chocolate, and to be able to identify them, you need to be able to do that.
Hmm.
So, how did you do that for yourself, or do you think about tasting in that way? I mean, are you careful about, all right, this is what I'm tasting. I don't recognize it, so I need to figure out what it is. I mean, is it a very, very conscious process for you when you're thinking about educating yourself as a judge?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I've been to Colombia, and so there, for example, I've tasted fruits that do not exist here. One of them,
Mhm.
my favorite one is feijoa, which is this. It's called.
Yep.
There's a species here that they call pineapple guava, which is not quite the same. But anyway, it is one of the most extraordinary fruits I've ever tasted. There's also guanábana. Um, there's maracuya, right? I mean, these are very rich tropical flavors. All the varieties of bananas that we are missing out on because of, well, that's a whole other story, but
Right.
right. So just all the different varieties, the diversity of fruits. And if you can taste it, then, I no longer have to say, well, it's a mixture of lemon and citrus and honey. You just say freijoa, right?
Right.
Um, Kind of like the first time I tasted cacao fruit pulp, which was, by the way, also at that same Northwest Chocolate Festival where you and I met. That's when I first tasted for the very first time fresh cacao fruit pulp. And it was, again, I remember that experience because of how rich and varied all the different mini flavors were that made up
Mhm.
the experience.
One of my favorite culinary experiences of all time was on a trip to Peru, either 2015 or 2017, and we went to a research station where they had rows and rows of different varieties of cacao planted right next to each other.
Mm,
Right? And we went from one row and tasted the pulp from one variety, and then went to the next row and tasted the pulp from another variety, and then went to the next row and tasted it. And it is just really quite amazing the difference in floral and fruit notes and acidity and sweetness. We it's like there's more variety than apples, right?
Yeah.
In most respects. I mean, most of us only know what 4 or 5 or 6 different kinds of apples, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties of cacao. The whole experiential nature is just really, really quite remarkable. And one of the things that always, I've marveled at is like, why are we only focused on the seeds?
Right.
Because there are so many other, and why are we only focused on brown? Right? And it's just, it makes no sense
Yeah,
for
we tend
me.
to do that, right? We tend to have these
Yeah.
mono cultures, and it's
Right. Yeah. And monocultures of ideas are just as bad as monocropping.
yeah,
Right. So,
true.
it's like, I like mavericks and being a maverick and bringing things different ways and have a slightly different viewpoint on things, because if we're all thinking about the same thing in the same way, life is boring, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
the craft chocolate movement was it got kicked off in 1997 when Scharfenberger, right? So
Hmm.
we're only 25 years into this new movement. It's way too early to say this is what chocolate should be,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and for what's going on. I talked about an experience during this recent craft chocolate challenge. We had a bar. It was like the gold winner in the dark chocolate, and it was the overall winner from a company called Sweet Escalier in Japan. And I opened it up, and this is not something I've ever done before. But it was a bar. It was in little squares, beautiful mold, and I just started breaking it apart into
Mm.
these little squares. There was something just insanely satisfying
Mhm.
about being able to break this bar up into little squares that I literally went through the entire bar and just bang, 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 bang. It was just like, oh, I'd never thought about that before in quite that way. And it's one of the first times that I've been really, really surprised, right, about, the format of a bar of chocolate in as long as I can remember. It was really,
Mm.
really crazy. Right. So I want to take a quick break, step back just a little bit. We're about 2/3 of the way to today's program. My guest today is Birgitte Rasine. Brigitte, friend and colleague. We've known each other, it seems like a lot longer than 7 years since we first met in person. She's also an author, as am I. We're also technologists, and that's really, really interesting overlap. And I think it forms a lot of the basis for why we're working together. Number one, here today as a guest on Pod Safe Chocolate. But Brigitte, I want to talk about this thing that we're going to be doing together, which is called letters. And because you're the one who suggested it to me, what I'm going to let you do is talk to me a little bit about the letters concept. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up your website on Substack, which is called what do you call it on Substack? Your community on Substack called the Cacao Muse.
Yes.
Why don't we talk a little bit about the Cacao Muse? And if you're out there and if you have a question for either Brigitte or me or a comment you'd like to make, throw it in the comments. We'll get it up on the screen. So Brigitte, tell me a little bit about what the Cacao Muse is and does. And then what we can also do is talk about the Letters Project and what that means. I'm going to
Yeah.
hide that to make it a little more visible. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm also going to make this a little bigger so it's a little more legible. By the way, there is a link to this post on the chocolatelife.com in the post for today's episode. And so you don't need to worry about what the URL of this post is. You'll be able to find it in the links in today's post. So tell me about the Cacao Muse and then talk to me about letters and what we plan to do.
So the Cacao Muse is something that I've been thinking about ever since the pandemic, and it came out of the chocolate judging. When I was judging these chocolates, I saw how beautifully packaged and molded a lot of them were. And being an amateur photographer, I said, well, this is just too beautiful for me to, get into without taking a picture of it first. So I started kind of simply, and over
Right.
time,
Let's
yeah,
go there. There. I
that's
mean,
one of
I'm a
them.
photographer. I'm a photographer by training, and here are your reviews. And I don't do nearly as much photography as you do. But not only are the images very, very interesting, but you've chosen non-traditional color palettes, if I can, for chocolate for doing
Mhm.
this. And so the reviews are as much as a visual experience as they are reading about them, which
Yes,
I think is
exactly.
very, very cool.
Yeah. And if you go to the other one too, that's one that was perhaps a little bit more uh, artistic, right? Something like that. Putting that is a doily that's from Spain. That white cloth is from the Czech Republic. Belongs to my family. It's a white damask tablecloth. Then there's a seashell, right? So I started mixing uh, different props together.
Mhm.
Um, I have at this point hundreds of photographs, and so there, we're going to start publishing those, and a lot of them are very whimsical. I'm not going to spoil. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but let's just say there's going to be some very interesting photos that you'll see.
Sure.
But anyway, so I started doing these tabletops, and I'm like, okay, so I started an Instagram profile where I would post like poetry and chocolate, and then just how the pandemic was. It's domestic duties. I had a full-time job. I mean, it was just not enough time. And it wasn't until this year that I said, all right, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do this thing. But I didn't launch it on Instagram. I launched it on Substack because I read another Substack about human creativity and AI. And so that experience opened my eyes to what is possible. Not only could I post the photographs, I could blow it up, expand it into an entire online library and cafe. That's what I call the Cacao Muse. It's not a blog, it's not a newsletter. It's an online library cafe of all things related to cacao and chocolate. So, you have the book that's being serialized there, you have the reviews and the photographs. There's a kids corner that I'm going to be developing, the FACQ, which is the frequently answered chocolate questions, or frequently asked, I should say. So there's a lot
Asked
of
and answered.
yeah. Um, Asked and answered. That's right. And then, of course, the letters. Now, the letters come from, you know, when I was growing up, and you probably did this too. I don't know if you had a pen pal, but I had a pen pal in France. This girl that, there were these programs where before the internet, before email, before smartphones, you could sign up for a service where they matched kids in different countries, and we would send physical letters together. We would write it out by hand, put it in the mail. She would get it a week or two later, and then maybe a month later, I would get her response. And so we would write back and forth like that. And I miss that. And so Substack introduced this thing called letters, and it's nothing complicated. You just write back and forth, and it's an open correspondence, right? So if I were to send you a letter in the mail, it would just be for you. But with the digital platform, with Substack, anybody can read it. And I think that's fascinating. And actually, lots of people on Substack are doing it. There are other writers that I know that have letter exchanges about either the process of writing or their lives or cats or, whatever it is that they want to write about. And so I've always wanted to do this. And yeah, so I'm very excited that, that you said yes.
And I'm very, very excited to do it as well as a new form of collaboration. As part of one of the things I've always wanted to do with the Chocolate Life is make it a platform. How can I take my platform and get other people who are interested in moving in the same direction, moving in the uh, helping other people to grow their voice is one of the things that I've always wanted to do here. And so I'm really, really excited about doing this. But what I want to point out to people is that if you go to the Chocolate Life, the post for today, there's a link to the Cacao Muse Substack and the link to this first bit of correspondence from Brigitte. And later this afternoon, what I'm going to be doing is posting my response. And then Brigitte will respond to my response and so on. We'll go through 4 or 5, or I don't even know if we'll go to that many back and forth about a particular topic, right? Cacao Origin Story is the first series of letters, correspondences. Brigitte, you chose that. And then for the next series, I'm going to choose the topic and we'll go back and forth. Every one of the letters in the correspondence that's related to each other will have the same image. So you'll be able to identify them back and forth. You don't have to be a member of either the Chocolate Life or the Cacao Muse in order to be able to read these things, right? So I'm really hoping, and I know you are too, to be able to start this dialogue and get this now mostly lost for people of a certain age, art, right, of writing letters to each other and then keeping the correspondence. 2 years later, 3 years later, being able to open up a stack of letters and be able to read through them is a really, really wonderful kind of thing. So we do have a comment and a question, I believe, from a viewer on Facebook, a watcher on Facebook. So Theodore, what I think you're doing is you're actually providing a nice segue into the next aspect of what it is that I want to do with PodSafe Chocolate, and a question that I'm going to be asking Brigitte to answer before we end is, you think that there should be more focus on helping cooperatives improve their cocoa bean and processing and quality with taste panels, which should be the basis for making specialty chocolate. Farmers do not get the credit, nor do chocolate manufacturers indicate where they source cocoa beans. So do you have a response to that you want to make, Brigitte?
Well, some do, right? I mean, some of the bars do have the origin, like especially the single origin bars, but he's right. I mean, a lot of them don't. It just says, it might even have organic fair trade label, but nowhere does it indicate where the bean's coming from. And a lot of times that's because they're mixed. They come in from multiple origins, and sometimes the chocolatier doesn't even know, and so they can't put a label on their bars. And this is where, some of the technology that we talked about might be able to help trace where all the beans are coming from. So if it's a blend, I would certainly want to know, well, where is it all coming from? So I support that. Yeah.
So what I would also say is that there are at least 2 projects out there in the world, one of which is the Cacao of Excellence program, and the other one is the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Project. And both of them are about recognizing excellent cocoa beans from around the world and then providing feedback to the farmers about how to improve them. Now, one of the things that is, for me, very disappointing about both of those projects is they never actually started out with what I think is the most important aspect of this, right, is being given a Cacao of Excellence designation or an HCP designation actually doesn't make a difference to the farmer in terms of their income. Are they selling more beans? Are they getting a higher price for their beans? So we don't know what the economic impact of these awards are going to be. Now, what I can say with the upcoming EU deforesting regulations, so the EUDR, which comes into full effect this time next year, so December of 2024, all of the beans going into Europe are going to know, do these beans come from deforested lands or places where the beans should not be grown? And so the underlying technology, in order to do some of that tracking and traceability, should be in place. And things like mass balance are going to disappear, right? Because you can't actually trace. I don't think you'll be able to trace. And it's a really, really interesting place where regulation is going to significantly affect the marketplace. But we also need to think about the fact that specialty chocolate represents less than 1% of the market, right? And we need to be focusing on productivity more than production, right? Because if we just grow the supply, what happens is the price goes down, right? And if the price goes down, the farmer earns less. And there is, in fact, a ceiling. I hope to be interviewing Anthony Fountain of the Voice Network in December. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that, at some point you could be producing more cocoa, but actually earning less because of the effect on the market price. Very, very complicated stuff going on. And so, if we're going to focus on improving quality, first we need to make sure there's a market which is going to pay for the extra labor that the farmers need to go through in order to, quote unquote, improve quality, whatever that means. So Theodore, I really do agree with you, basically. However, this is a complex multivariate problem. And when you pull on one of the variables, other things fall apart. I mean, do you have any more to say on that topic, Brigitte?
He actually says, I ran a project in which we put in place Choa Labs produced small qualities or quantities, put in place tasting panels. Yeah, and to that I would add, you're talking about the market. So in order for the market to have more demand, for more awareness and demand, is this is where a lot of the storytelling is coming in, right? Not just
Mhm.
marketing, but storytelling. Because anytime that every time I give a talk, I have, or a workshop, or
Mhm.
just talk to my colleagues, they say, "Oh, I didn't know this existed. Oh, I didn't," because most people know the commercial candy bars, the Snickers, the Almond Joys, the Three Musketeers. That's, I mean, you look at Halloween. I mean, that's why I wrote the post about
Yeah.
Halloween on the Cacao Muse, right? Is we go into the stores and we just grab whatever's there. A
Mhm.
lot of these, like Ratza, for example, you can't get in stores. This is not in your regular grocery store. So you have to
Mhm.
first of all be aware that this thing exists, know where to go, and then of course there's the price point to talk about. You know, $10, $15 a bar versus a couple bucks. You can't argue with that for a lot of people, sadly, right? So
Right. Yeah. Well, it's really that's an interesting point. Is that for example, I had a conversation with somebody in the r/chocolate subreddit, and they were talking about Galaxy bars at £1 a piece, as opposed to a Tony's bar at like £3 80. And if you actually did the weight comparison, the Tony's bar was less expensive than the Galaxy bar. But the
yeah,
difference between £1 and £3 80s, they couldn't do that math in their head, and so they just thought that the Galaxy was less expensive when it wasn't. I mean,
yeah.
when we think about it, is chocolate is one of the most affordable luxury foods in the world. I think cheese might be the only one which is as affordable. When we think about when we think about gourmet foods, I mean the former Queen of England, right, with all her billions of dollars, couldn't buy better chocolate than either you or I could, or anybody watching, right? Which is a really, really interesting point to make,
Yeah.
right? She can buy, the royal family could buy much better wine, swans, which I can't have, and things like that. There are lots of things that they can have, but they can't buy better chocolate than we have. And so you can walk into a store with like $20 or 20 pounds, and you can have your choice from among the world's best. And try to think about that with wine or spirits or anything, and it can't be done. And so our whole estimation of the value of chocolate is so off kilter when we
Mhm.
believe that it should be cheap. So I think that from a messaging standpoint, that's one of the things that I want to really work on, right? Is this disconnect for what's going on. And what I do want to say to Theodore, listen, I probably wrote the first review of Chocolate back in January of 2008. I knew Jane and Louis Rossetto I'm sorry, Jane Metcalf and Louis Rossetto, who were the first investors into who were, among other things, the co-founders of Wired magazine. I met them at TED 2. While they were still in Amsterdam publishing Electric Word. And some people say that CHO stands for Timothy Child's Hopeless Obsession. So TC being right, or T Cho is technology and chocolate. I mean, it's a fabulous story, and they have I visited one of their projects in Piura while I was there in I think 2015, and their flavor labs. And and one of the things that they wanted to do is they wanted to put these flavor labs into farms and use networks of Zigbee sensors on trees, and connected to this container, and upload via satellite all this data about the farm, right? So and what they did in terms of saying, listen, we want you to beta test our chocolate, but you have to come into the factory. It's just like an fabulously wonderful story. But now they're owned by Fuji Oil. Fuji Oil, no, Izaki Glico. And so I'm really, really happy that they've been able to continue the work they're doing. Brad Kinser, I've known for years, and really, really respect him as a chocolate maker. And it's a great story. But yeah, I know the Cho Lab's history, and have seen it in action in northern Peru. I want to give a quick shout out, if I can. Just we got a couple more comments. And so Ewald Rietberg, I mean, Ewald is one of the pair of chocolate makers at my favorite European chocolate company these days, Hinde and Vera in Rotterdam. You have a QR code on the packaging leading to a page with all relevant info on the cacao crop or plantation and how the bar is made. That is one tool that can be used. But I think that the challenge, and this might be something that you can talk about, is that, Brigitte, is that when we're thinking about blockchain systems, all of these blockchains tend to be independent silos. There's no interoperability between them, right? So there are bunches of like Origin down in Orijin down in Ecuador. There are all these different systems, different QR codes, but there's no consistency in the data that is collected. There's no interoperability. So this is great. This is what you're doing for the people who love your brand, Evold, and I, really do um, want to congratulate for doing it and push forward and make it. But one of the things that I'm interested as a data guy is how do we get all these differing data sources into some place where we can really have an understanding about what it is that's going on. It's really, really quite, wonderful. Your thoughts about that, Brigitte, if we can, really, really quickly?
Yeah, I think it is wonderful. I think if, every single bar had a QR code on it like that, then it would become a thing, just like a price point, just like the ingredient list, right? Like just something that you come to expect. So I think these are the early movers, people like Ewald. So I think the more companies that can start to do that, I think it's a wonderful thing. Thumbs up for me on that,
Right. I also want to thank Ewald for his recommendation of bastard suiker as an ingredient. You talked about ingredients. I mean, bastard suiker is this DOP sugar coming out of the Netherlands, and it's amazing if people don't know about it. And one of my sad things is it's really, really hard to get Hinda and Vera in the United States. We need to figure out how to do that. It's one reason. If you're ever in the Netherlands, you need to go to Rotterdam and you need to have this chocolate. In my opinion, like hands down, one of my top 3-5 makers in Europe at the moment. Really, 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 really good stuff. There's one other comment that I want to get to before we resolve this question, and we're just a couple of minutes past. You got a couple more minutes, Brigitte?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another comment here, right? So Sam from, I'm guessing, Washington State. I'm wondering, this is a technical question, if I know how humidity differences in raw cacao powder packed in vacuum-sealed plastic bags with oxygen absorbers may affect it versus breathable paper bags. And so the answer is whenever we have a product, right, and cacao is the one we're speaking of right now, and you have a free fatty acid component, right? What you need to worry about is oxidation, because the free fatty acid component can increase. And so that free fatty acid component is going to contribute to sensations of staleness and rancidity. Right? And so if the product is not properly stored, then over time, and we're talking about after a year, right, you might run into issues of degradation, right? Especially if the ambient environment is higher temperature or higher humidity. So, it turns out that, right, almost everybody I know who's producing cocoa powder in large quantities, who's putting it in paper sacks, there is an internal HDPE liner, right, which is going to prevent oxygen and moisture from penetrating into the cocoa powder. What you can also do is you can keep it cold, keep it below 15 degrees centigrade, and you'll reduce the degradation over time. But it's when you're keeping it at ambient above 20 degrees that it will increase the tendency for the formation of these free fatty acids from oxidation and the likelihood that this will go rancid or seem stale. Hopefully that answers your question, and very, very different from the rest of everything we're talking about today, but happy to do that. And so that's just one last really, really quick quote. So I want to thank Theodore so writing the Cho and Equal Exchange Project for 5 years. I think that's great. And finally from Ewald, 5 in Netherlands. Okay, the next time I come to Netherlands, I don't know if I will be there in February for Chocoa. I'm hoping that I will be, but you and I are going to all 5 of those. I just want to know you have committed yourself to taking a tour with me, road trip, to these 5 in the Netherlands, and I'll put them on my list. And with that, I want to end the episode with a new way of ending. People who watch the Chocolate Life Live will know I sign off. If you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. But what I want to do today, if I can, Brigitte, is start a new closing for Pod Save Chocolate, which is, what are you going to do? What are you going to commit to right here live on the internet to over the next week, over the next month, over the next year, what are you going to do to save chocolate? So how are we going to use this mechanism, Pod Save Chocolate, this vehicle, Pod Save Chocolate? What do you plan to do? And if you're out there watching and you're in the comments, like put the comment into the live stream, or even better, go over to the ChocolateLife. Let me share this. Go over to the ChocolateLife, right? If you're not a member, you can join. And when you join, you can go down to the bottom of every page, and there is a member discussion. You have to be a member in order to do that. So become a part of the discussion around Pod Save Chocolate, the mission for what it is that I want to do now. But Birgitte, spotlight is on you. Final spotlight is on you from a Save Chocolate point of view. What are you going to do? You have the final words today.
So I would say that, with all due respect, the operative word should be protect, not save, right? Because the connotation of saving is that the person or animal or plant that you're talking about is helpless and actually needs saving. And I would argue that planet Earth doesn't actually need savings. We humans are the ones that need saving a little bit more. But to be a little bit more serious, so chocolate and cacao, they need to be protected and respected. I think that it's that original sacred relationship that the native people, that the Maya and others had with cacao, that we, in commoditizing and commercializing chocolate, have lost a little bit. So I think that's the first step, right? If we can do that, if we can start to respect chocolate and protect it, then it will thrive, and so will we. So having said that, how am I going to do that? How am I going to commit? Well, I already have, right? My first step was the book. Second step is the Cacao Muse. My role is a storyteller, basically. I do not grow cacao. I don't produce it. I don't make chocolate. I tell stories. Even the judging, Clay, that I do is in a way is a form of storytelling. And that is what I'm good at. So for me, the linkages that I see from cacao's origins as a sacred food, as a creation story, the health and nutrition benefits, its geopolitics, the economy, the mass commercialization that I talked about, if I can help tell those stories to a public that hasn't been previously aware, and if I can make that connection and introduce all of these wonderful farmers and companies that are trying to do the right thing and bring them a much wider public and expand the market, then by God, I'll have done my purpose. And that's my commitment.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think it is a fabulous way to end this first episode of Pod Save / Protect Chocolate. Now, I want you to know that the reason why I chose Pod Save Chocolate is because there's a very, very I was inspired by the podcast, politics podcast, Pod Save America, and I wanted to bring some of that humor, right, into this, because that's what it is that I really appreciate. It's not deadly serious. We can know the humanity and the humor in what it is that we're doing, and I think when we do that, it makes the storytelling easier. That people are more willing to pay attention to it. And it's one of the things. Listen, Birgitte, I hope you'll be back in a couple of months. We'll continue the conversation as we've had a chance to move through the letters. By the way, everybody, go read the letter series between the Cacao Muse, which is on Substack, and the ChocolateLife, which is on Ghost. Getting that to work technologically is an interesting challenge in and of itself. But hopefully what you'll end up doing is you'll end up subscribing to the Cacao Muse, and you'll becoming a member of the ChocolateLife and sharing these with lots of other people. And until the next time, everybody, thank you very much for being a part of this first episode of Pod Save Chocolate. Birgitte, thank you very, very much for being my first guest. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you today. And again, I want to continue. We will be continuing the conversation during the letters that we're doing. And everybody, right, when we come back here, right, one of the things I'm going to be ending every episode with this question: what are we going to do, right, to save / protect chocolate? And I want you to think about it. What are you going to do, right? You love chocolate. That's why you're here. You love cacao. That's why you're here, right? Let's see what we can do to protect that which we all dearly love. And until the next time, everybody,